Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. The title of this video and possibly my attire will give you a hint as to what this is going to be about. This is sort of a follow-up video to the one I made a couple of days ago, calling out the sort of disrespect that's been shown to the great champion that is Oleksandr Usyk. Now, I like to think that no fighter, no one in fact, is beyond criticism. But the reason I like Usyk so much, and I think this is a view shared by a lot of people, is that, just to sort of do a brief recap, in quite a limited amount of fights, he's been undisputed cruiserweight champion in a good era of the cruiserweights, cleaned it up. He's done the same, pretty much the same in the heavyweight division in 7 fights or whatever it is, 8 fights, if you include the one coming up. Beaten Joshua twice, legitimately, beaten Fury twice, legitimately, beaten Dubois already once, legitimately. But the disrespect he's been shown, and I know a lot of people think it's just hype from Dubois and Warren's camp. To me, it rather exceeds hype and goes into the realms of pure trash, classlessness, the sort of thing that Tyson Fury likes to indulge in, or did like to indulge in, and probably will again. Look, Usyk's won every title he's ever held on the road, in people's backyards. He almost never trash talks. Can you think of an occasion when he's really trash talked? Not really. Made a couple of comments recently about Dubois' team. But even when he's asked straight, do you think Dubois weak mentally or something, a question of that ilk, he won't then get stuck in. He said, he was asked that very question, and he said, well, maybe a little bit. In other words, he's kind of diplomatic, but he's not. He doesn't come across as a fool. If you're religious, as I've said before, I'm not. But if you are, he seems to me to be a pretty good example of somebody whose faith, in this case his Christian faith, helps him a great deal, gives him structure in his life. And, he genuinely seems to care about other people, has respect for other people, loves his wife and his children, talks about them constantly. Carries a little toy, a little Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh around that his daughter gave him. This is a guy who seems completely confident in his own skin and is sure of his identity as a fighter, what he can do. He probably in the back of his mind thinks, okay, I'm better at this than this, therefore, I need to work on everything. He's just a consummate professional. And one might say, the best type of human being that you're going to get, because none of us are flawless. We've all got our flaws. Look, you contrast this with the behaviour of Don Charles. Now, I met Don Charles once. I only had a conversation that may have been between 5 and 10 minutes. I was queuing up to go into the York Hall. He happened to say, excuse me, can I get through? I was one of the people moving. I said, oh, hello, Don, blah, blah, blah. And he took time out to speak to me. And I always liked Don. I always thought he came across, again, as being a class act. He spoke. I said to him something, I can't remember the exact conversation because it was only brief, but I said something like, who have you got on the card, who you're training, blah, 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 blah. I can't even remember who it was, but he made, a few comments and he exchanged pleasantries. And he took 5 minutes of his time. He was going into the York Hall, probably to see his fight. He took 5 minutes to, speak to me, and a couple of other guys were chipping in. And, those little things mean something. To me, they show a class act. And he always came across very well when he was in charge of, Chisora. But he always came across very well, very, very decent, very, very dignified. But he did have the reputation of being, well, he's kind of a nearly man, if you like. He's sort of he's trained good fighters like Chisora, but he's never really achieved a great deal. Even though Chisora, has been British, Commonwealth, and European champ, he can't quite get over that final hurdle into world class. He's not really a world class trainer. Then he gets he gets put in as Daniel Dubois' trainer, because Dubois, probably more specifically, Stan Dubois, had a falling out with Shane McGuigan. Stan Dubois, as we know, has to be the focal point of everything where Daniel's concerned. And Don came in, and I'm tempted to say he sort of, swallowed any objections in order to train this very fine heavyweight, which Daniel Dubois is. But since then, he's become, the word I can only use is bitter. It's almost as if having finally got to the top of the tree. I mean, Don's in his 60s, isn't he? Finally got there. He's like, okay, all you bastards who had a go at me, I'm going to rail on you. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to verbally smash you up. And anyone else who gets in my way, it's my time now. Now, there's a lot to be said for that type of mentality, but it's how you go about doing it. Because in a sense, the fact that he's now training a heavyweight titleist means he's there anyway. So he's answered all his critics. What can they say now? Hey, you're training Daniel Dubois. And he ignores the fact that Daniel almost never mentions him when he's asked about his team. It's always my dad, my dad, my dad. Daniel fixated on his dad, and he loves his dad, and my dad is everything. And oh yeah, my team as well. Don Charles, yeah, him as well. So the interviewer will say, "What about Don Charles?" Yeah. My whole team's great. It's never I want to thank Don Charles for taking over just before the first Usyk fight, for helping me. And I'm sure Don has done a lot of good work with Daniel, but of course Daniel only talks about his dad. It's just, well, it is what it is. I mean, I would be happy if I wasn't getting any sort of public recognition. But what I wouldn't do is, I like to think I wouldn't do, is just turn into a really nasty, bitter person. And this seems to be what Don Charles is. So those people that say about my previous video, well, you're missing the point, it's just hype. Why can't you see this? Look, I understand hype. I understand the narrative, the fake narrative that's been created. Was it a low blow or wasn't it? It was a low blow. You know how I know it was a low blow? Because I watched the video, I watched different angles, and it was also called a low blow by the referee. So it's a fucking low blow. All right, you weren't robbed, Daniel. You lost virtually every round of that fight. You know it. Your dad knows it. Don Charles knows it. Frank Warren knows it. Okay, and you quit as well at the end. You mentally unraveled. Your psyche was shattered, and you just quit from a jab. All right, you could have gotten up and you didn't. All right, that's the reality of it. Okay, but Don, of course, leading the cavalry charge on this sort of nonsensical narrative, he's doing it in a way which is, well, ham-fisted. Don't even begin to cover it. If you think way back, several months ago, Don was casting aspersions on Usyk's faith, essentially saying he was a liar. Thou shalt not bear false witness, or in other words, don't lie, a commandment. If Don knows his Bible, he will, of course, know that there are over 600 commandments, and not just the Decalogue, but that's a video for another thing, another time. But Don is, terribly pious. He's a Christian. I believe he's a Christian, is he? Is he a Christian too, Don? He claims to be a religious man, a believer in God and all this stuff. But no, he's piously pointing the finger at Usyk. Usyk's not done anything wrong. Usyk's not the referee. Usyk didn't give the count. No, you faked it. You need an Oscar, I think he said to Usyk, for your acting. And no. All right. Well, this smacks to me of absolute classlessness, because Usyk has always been a classy guy. And this goes beyond hype into a very personal disrespect. And sometimes, of course, fighters become very disrespectful. They insult each other. They chuck tables at each other, as Don will know from his days with Chisora. They'll talk all sorts of crap on social media, profane insults and so on. But when you think about it, you don't often get many trainers really putting the boot into an opponent, to their fighter's opponent. Why? Because they're the trainer. And they will, or they should, understand what goes into training a fighter and what the fighters have to go through in the ring. I've never, for example, heard Peter Fury slag off an opponent. I remember when Clarissa Shields beat Savannah Marshall, he was very complimentary, even though Shields had insulted him and said he was a you know, because he had 3 fights. I think he lost them all by 3 professional fights, lost them all by stoppage. Shields was taking the piss. He was very respectful. People who are members of the team, the inner circle, I mean, not just the hangers on, they are the ones that normally they'll shy away from insulting the opponent. They'll let their fighter do that. Why? Because their fighter's the one getting in the ring, and you know, they're the one that's going to be taking the punishment. They're the one that's going to be dishing out the punishment. They're the ones that are going to be, literally risking their lives. You know, so for a trainer to slag off an opponent and call them all sorts of, cast aspersions on their character, slander them, use slurs and so on, it comes across as classless. In other words, it comes across as more than just hype. And that really was the one of the purposes of my first video. And if you compare the two, Don Charles and Oleksandr Usyk, in terms of class, in terms of decency and dignity, I think there's only one winner, and it's not Don Charles. And I think, as I said in my first video, this is why this is backfiring on him. I think again, Usyk will be cheered to the ring, and whether he wins or loses, will be applauded out of it. Daniel is Daniel. Daniel, unfortunately, is. I'll be kind and say I think he's on the spectrum. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed, as they say. But I think there's more to it than that. I think I don't know whether we're talking autism, Asperger's, or whatever, but there's something there. But he just does whatever he's told to do. Lee from Inside the Distance made an excellent video, his prediction video for the fight, and he talked extensively about this and how Daniel is great when you give him an instruction. I think we've all sort of sussed this, but the way Lee explained it was, if you give him an instruction, like, here's an axe, go chop a load of wood, Daniel will do it. But if you say to Daniel, there's a lot of wood that needs to be chopped, here's half a dozen axes, he wouldn't know which one to pick up. He's got to be instructed. You know, it's that type of vibe with Daniel. So I don't really blame Daniel that much. I think it's rather silly, this whole, roadman thing that he's trying to get going on is a little bit embarrassing. But having said that, I've got nothing against the kid. He's probably quite a gentle giant outside the ring. But he ain't very bright. And Don Charles should know better. Frank Warren, of course. Frank Warren is Frank Warren. Frank Warren is a promoter who stands on the sidelines and lets the chaos ensue. He's dealt with Tyson Fury, hasn't he, for God knows how long. He's been in the business for 50 years. So this Daniel Dubois stuff is not going to be anything new to him. He's going to stand there smirking and let it all unfold and collect his money at the end of it. But Don Charles, as the head trainer, he's been more vocal than Stan Dubois. No, I think the disrespect shown to Usyk is unnecessary and goes beyond just promoting the fight. And also, let's not forget, certain media outlets, which are essentially they have this sort of tabloid mentality where controversy sells, and, talk sports, and the example people always use, but they're not the only one. All the shit rags like The Sun and Mail and all that crap. Yeah. Anyway, let me know what you think. Do you think I'm giving Usyk too much praise and overlooking certain things with Don Charles, being too harsh on Don Charles? Let me know what you think. Leave your comments below, and I'll answer them. I'll have a look at them. I always read your comments. And yeah, thanks very much for watching the video. If you did like the video, hit the like button, please. And by the way, despite all this attire, if Daniel Dubois wins fair and square, I'll applaud him. I'm telling you now, quote me on that, okay? Because I don't really have a horse in the race. I do love Usyk. But again, I don't dislike Daniel. I think Daniel's probably quite a nice lad, away from bad influences, shall we say, away from being told what to say which is against his natural personality or character, which is why it comes across as being very sort of forced when he starts trying to be the tough guy. But let me know what you think. I want to hear what you think. Please like the video. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support as always. And subscribe to the channel if you're new. Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll get you later. Bye for now.